Welcome to Land Talk from Texas Rec Land Real Estate. If you own land in the Lone Star State or you want to, this is the place for you. Now, I am Mike Beach, land agent with Texas Rec Land Real Estate. This is John Dean, broker and owner. John, let's just get into that, owning land in Texas. Why is that such a big deal? Why is that such a big conversation? Why do we meet so many people that want to own land in this state?
Yeah, so living in the Lone Star State, I mean, we have a lot of pride here. I mean, Texas has kind of always been built around private ownership, sovereignty, right? We kind of like the way we do things here, arguably maybe better than some other folks around the nation, but...
Arguably, I mean, 100%, 100%.
I think we take a lot of pride in what we do.
Yes, sir.
And one of the facts of, or kind of the driving point behind that is being able to control what you do through private ownership. So, looking at the big picture of things, I think that a lot of the buyers and sellers we deal with every day, I mean, they either bought land or want to buy land here because it kind of gives them, a blank canvas to do what they want to do, whether that's build a home, build a shop, build a lake, hunt, fish, farm, ranch. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do on land. So.
Absolutely, and it's about freedom, right? Like I think that's core to the Texas identity, is this idea of personal freedom. And what I own, I choose my own path, I choose my direction. Is that something you see, because we deal with so many landowners, so many people seeking land. Do you see that thread in people? That's pretty common?
Yeah, so I feel like as long as Texas has been here, like going back to the Alamo Walls, like there's just this thing ingrained in Texans that just want to have freedom and do what you want to do, how you want to do it.
That's what brought a lot of those settlers here. I mean, the whole state is full of, and we're the descendants of people that left somewhere safe to go somewhere a little bit more wild, somewhere with a little more opportunity. And, they had to go through a lot of adversity. I mean, they had to tame the wild here. So I feel like that is like a big part of the Texas DNA.
Yeah, and I think deep down inside, we're still trying to do that today. I think we're still trying to tame this wild beast that is Texas. And everybody has a different way of doing that, but I think we're always trying to tackle these these pent-up things in Texas history that we want to experience. And we're not cowboys anymore for the most part, right? A lot of us don't have cattle or horses. Some do, but I feel like it kind of takes you back to the roots of what a Texan should be, arguably. I think it's kind of, you're your own person. You get to make your own way, kind of trudge the hardest path you can or whatever to experience. But I think that's kind of the thing that drives a lot of what we do. So.
Yeah, and land ownership has always kind of been at the heart of that. That is, going back to cattle ranching. Cattle is such a huge part of the history of Texas. And, that idea of ownership has really carried through. Looking at like just the amount of private land in the state of Texas, how much is privately owned, and how we got to this state that we're in. Like literally the state that we're in is that it's like owning your own piece really seems to be central to the identity.
Yeah, I think it's just you're owning it, you're controlling it. Nobody can take it from you. It's kind of your castle on the hill in today's world. But kind of looking at what Texas has to offer. I mean, we're about 95% private land. Yeah. If you want to contrast that, Alaska is 95% public, which it's obviously a lot bigger. We don't admit that here, but it is a little bigger than us. But we have 5% public land. If you want to do the math, Texas is about 171 million acres, and 164 million acres of that is private land. So, and we've got stuff that are they're 2-acre tracts all the way up to the King Ranch is like 911,000 acres. So we've got big ranches, small ranches, everywhere in between, and everybody's got a different idea of what they can do with those. I mean, there's folks that want to have 5 acres and plant a garden and do sustainable living, and then there's the big cattle rancher with 100,000 acres that raises cattle. And then when you get into oil history, which is crazy, I mean, we have a lot of room to do a lot of things here.
And you and I have talked about this so much too, about you talk about oil and mineral rights, and that is one of those very, very complex things that comes with land ownership and land stewardship that I think a lot of people, when they're flirting with the idea, or let's say they inherit a tract of land, they've never dealt with it, that's one of that long list, that long litany of things that's so complex about land. And there's like we always talk about, there is a long list of things.
Yeah, there's a really long list. And I think real estate in general kind of gets put into one big blanket category, that it's kind of a one-stop shop. Everything's the same. What works here also works here. And with land, it's very quickly going to prove that's not true. So.
Yeah, because technically I have the same license as somebody who sells condominiums or houses.
That's
technically
right.
I have the same license, but night and day.
Yeah, and going through getting, like if you're a real estate agent, getting your license, they teach you one course with one course work. and it has to cover everything in the entire state of Texas, which, like we talked about, there's a lot of different uses, a lot of different sizes. Then you get into pricing. I mean, my gosh, there's tracts that are $5,000 and there's tracts that are $250 million. So things get more complex, and I think we found in Texas regular real estate here over the last 10 or 11 years that experience goes a long way. There's a lot of things you don't know. Obviously, we've learned a lot over time, and the good thing is we get to use that going forward. So
yeah, and it's that long list is something that when I stepped into the world of being a land agent, and as you remember, like you helped me find a tract of land was the way that we met, and I was so fascinated with all these things that I hadn't thought of, and all these problems to solve that I had not thought of, and it made me realize, like, hey, this is a profession. This is something that is, this is a skill set that's really unique, and it obviously got me to where I'm sitting here with you today, and this is what we're doing. But I think a lot of people don't understand that when you start working yourself towards, like, hey, maybe I'd like to buy a tract of land, or maybe I'd like to do something with this land that I have, I'd like to work on it. Where do I find this knowledge? What is that list of things? Like, in your mind, with the number of people you've dealt with that are buying and selling, what are, let's say, the top three? What are the top three issues that come up on land that tend to blindside people or that are more complex than people realize?
Yeah, I think the things that we run into most often, if I was going to narrow it down to three, would be water and mineral rights. I'm going to lump those together.
Yeah.
But the fact that in Texas, the mineral rights supersede the surface rights. So when you own a property and you can use the surface, but Texas law, minerals supersede that. So if there's minerals under your property, they always have kind of the first shot over your use of the property. So that's a big thing there. Mineral rights can be very scary and very difficult. They can be very complicated. With a lot of properties, we run into different issues to where either the minerals are so separated. They could have been cut from a property 100 years ago. You don't know who owns those now.
Yeah.
It could be one person, it could be 100 people. So they're complex. Water rights, to lump those back together, I mean, we're just in an area here in Texas where water is becoming so important because we're growing. So as water becomes more valuable, you have companies that are leasing water to ship it to bigger metropolitan areas. That's a direct issue, but it's also a perceptive issue because when I buy a property, I want to know that, hey, this is my water. I get to use it. I'm not going to drill a well and it go dry because it's being overused. So that water is a really big issue, and I think it's only going to get bigger and bigger with time. So the second one would be access. A lot of times, buyers and sellers think a property have access, and it just doesn't. Sometimes you're on a landlocked property. Sometimes you have a mechanism to access a property, but that's not legal. So maybe it was a handshake deal. Maybe the way they wrote it wasn't correct and it wouldn't hold up with an underwriter at title. And then I think for a third thing, like just intended use of the property, and that could tie back in utilities. Do you need water? Do you need power? If it doesn't have those, where do you get them from? That could be really complicated. And then it kind of all ties back into, do you need easements to get those utilities to your property? Will your neighbor give you that easement? So that's kind of a big blanket issue, but I think your intended use of the property, what you need to use it for, what you want to use it for. So
yeah, and a lot of people, they want to be homeowners. So that's a thing that we run across. When I was new to the job, I sort of thought that everybody's going to be like me. They wanted a piece of recreational land, a place to go, expand, a place to go hunt. They wanted to, have a hunting lease. They wanted to do it with friends, or they wanted to, have a place to just ride ATVs, et cetera, et cetera. But the more I've done it, the more I realize a lot of people are homesteading, and that's been a really big thing in the past 10 years too. Is people, homestead, and they want to find a place with a home, or they want to build a new home. And I think that was what surprised me too, is that while we've talked about that we're not residential agents, so to speak, we end up selling a lot of homes. We end up buying and helping people buy and sell a lot of homes, and that tends to be a big part of it. Has it always been that way, or have you seen that grow more in the past decade?
Yeah, I think things are definitely growing. I think as the bigger cities in Texas continue to expand even more rapidly, there's a lot of folks that do want to build their own home. And so I think like being a land agent, it's a little different because, like you said, we do get to sell a lot of houses. Houses have their own issues, but I think we're better because we get to not only deal with the houses that we know quite a bit about, but we get to do the land. The land is arguably the tougher part for a lot of residential agents to learn, just because There's just a lot more wrinkles to it that they don't usually run into in a residential sale. So.
Yeah, and they're usually contextual a lot of times, I think. Like there is, it's not like there's a house and then there's the land. Usually, the same issues that, obviously the house sits on the land. So, the same issues they're going to be dealing with, like that top 3 that you mentioned, you're still going to apply those to them as a homeowner because they still have to consider all those things. What facilities are attached to the home? What outbuildings are there? How big is the actual homestead? The thing that the thing for tax purposes, homestead versus land. They're all related. It's not like there's just house versus land. Most people do end up living on their land in some way.
Yeah. And if they don't now, that's usually the goal in the future. So we deal with a lot of folks that they don't have the means or the time or the ability to do a house today. But a lot of folks are coming here because this is their retirement dream. So they're going to come here, and in 10 years, they may build their dream house. And I think that's a really cool thing. I think land kind of turns in a way to build your future, and that future may not be right now. That could be in 5 or 10 years, or it could be, we have folks that want to leave land to their kids and grandkids, and I think that's a really cool legacy too. So.
And it's a less romantic thing that you bring up for sure, but land is an investment, and a lot of times there's we literally call it land banking. This is a way that people can put their money into something that's going to show some growth for them, and that's something that especially in Central Texas, growing as big as things are here in this state, we're really seeing that be an option for a lot of people and a viable option, I think, for a lot of folks.
Yeah, land historically in our area, and in arguably most every area of Texas, if you look at the growth over the years, land has constantly shown an increase. There's been some dips like everything. The stock market goes up and down, land does the same thing, but by and large, there's been some just huge growth in real estate, and with that comes those investors. Either those guys are land banking, then they're going to sit on those properties for some number of years. But then you also kind of get into the more residential subdivisions, subdivided bidder tracts into smaller ones, and that sort of thing. So
yeah, and the subdivision phenomenon is really one that's kind of taken us by storm, I guess is a good way to say it. I in the counties where I work, I see a lot of that. It's these. And it's kind of watching that cycle of investment and that cycle of land happen, where you've had these these giant, usually cattle ranches, a lot of times that have gone through several generations, and maybe one part of the family's kind of fallen out, not wanting to ranch it anymore, or things have changed, circumstances. So they end up selling this, and it gets divided up into these tracts. Sometimes divided into big tracts, and then later on divided even smaller to these 10-acre ranchettes that we're seeing. I think there's an incredibly surprising volume of people that are buying that 10-acre ranchette, because I think that's what a lot of people can handle.
And I think typically what we've seen is that that 10, 15, 20-acre range, that's a really manageable size. You can, depending on the property, you can still hunt that property.
Yeah.
You have room to grow a garden, build a shop, build a house. It's manageable. It's not overwhelming. And honestly, most of the time, it has to do with price point. That's just a good price point. There's a lot of folks that either have access to that money or can get a loan or whatnot. So it's kind of just, it gets that number more manageable, where you can be a landowner, but you don't have to spend $1 million to do it. So, but we have seen a lot of that.
So I'm gonna put you on the spot for one, because you did make me think about, and we didn't rehearse this, so we're just gonna go for it. But I'm gonna quiz you. The type of client that may come to you, somebody like I was way back when, that's looking for a piece of hunting land.
Yeah.
That's what that's the purpose they're looking for. They may want to just do it themselves. They want to divide it amongst buddies, run a lease or something like that. How are you going to approach that person? What's the advice you're going to give somebody? How are you going to counsel that potential buyer coming in that's looking for a piece of hunting land? What do you think should be their top priorities when they're looking at a tract?
So I'm a big deer hunter. If you look at our logo, like it's the state of Texas, it's deer horns. I grew up deer hunting. That's the big history of kind of what drives me.
And you're going to get that first buck one day soon, I know. I can feel it coming, man. I can feel it happening.
So, but no, looking at a hunting property from kind of the big overview, being that I grew up hunting here, I know where the good deer hunting's at. The first thing I'm going to do, if some guy comes to me and says, I want the best deer hunting property that I can find, I'm going to say, okay, you need to go to this particular section of the county, because either I've hunted there or I know people that have. I know there's good deer numbers. So I think, looking in the big county picture, I would select areas that are better for hunting. And then to the next point after that, looking at specific properties, I'm going to look at cover. I'm going to look at what the neighbors are doing. There's obviously a lot of things that go into a really good hunting property, but I think the number one thing, you got to be where the deer are. If there's no deer there, the hunting's not going to be great. So that's number one. And then I think from there, you tone it down to the property and figure out what that property has. Does it have creeks? Does it have areas that deer like to travel? And is it multifaceted? I like to deer hunt, but most of the guys we deal with, they want the best of every world. So they want a good place that's good to dove hunt, and good to deer hunt, and good to duck hunt. And those places are going to be tougher to find because there's a lot more things going on. But there's some properties here that can do it all. They have ducks, they have deer, they have dove, they have all those things, and it's really cool to kind of get the whole package here, where you can go catch a 5-pound bass, and later on that evening go shoot a big deer. That's the dream, and that's
people write songs about it.
Yeah, that's kind of the kid in me that wants that, right? I want the place that'll do it all, and everybody does. And so when you find those, they're rare, but they're really cool. So.
And, you hit on something that is a very common thing when I'm talking to people who are looking for hunting land as well. Is you mentioned what the neighbors are doing. I tell them to think in terms of square miles instead of acres. If you're looking at that habitat, don't just think about the tract you're looking at. Think about what's next to it. I mean, a deer is going to spend, most deer, especially in this region, are going to spend their entire life in 1 square mile, 1 or 2 square miles. And so they're going to go where they have everything they need in that habitat. They don't need to go very far. And so if you can look at the map and zoom out in your mapping app or whatever it is and see like, okay, what's going on around here? Is there a gravel pit next door? Or is there, just a 10,000 acre cattle ranch right next door with a low fence?
The thing you really want is an old grandma that has 500 acres that never leaves the house. That's the neighbor you want. But yeah, I mean, 1 square mile, that's probably a pretty good figure. I mean, a square mile is 640 acres. I mean, I think for the most part, a mature buck will stay in that area. I'm sure there's data out there to prove otherwise. I'm sure there's some just really smart deer that'll cover 2,000 acres, but
all the ones I hunt are the super smart.
That's the ones you have. So, but I think 640 acres. That's probably a good figure. I think most of the deer are going to stay there unless something really strange happens. But yeah, it is a bigger picture. I mean, I think you can do a lot of things on your property to really make it inviting and arguably lure those deer in, but if your neighbors are not doing the right things, or maybe the neighbor property, they are doing the right things, but their property is just too open or something like that to where the deer just don't want to be there anyway. So,
yeah. All right, well, you passed the quiz. You did it. You get an A+ on that one. All right, well, if you're looking for hunting land or any other kind of land, check us out at txrecland.com. That's the website. We got the properties that are listed there right now. Check us out on social media as well. All the links will be there. But we enjoyed it. John, enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah,
man.
thanks for coming in, Mike.